Tenochtitlan, the great Aztec city. When Columbus reached the Americas, he encountered the natives of the Bahamas and the Caribbean, who belonged to relatively simple cultures. But what the later conquistadors found on the mainland of America was of an entirely different caliber. They discovered two great civilizations, the Aztecs and the Incas, each with populations in the millions. The greatest and most impressive city of the Aztecs was Tenochtitlan, with an estimated population of 200,000 people. The city was quickly destroyed by the Spaniards and then rebuilt as Mexico City. And this destruction was especially tragic, given the mind-blowing descriptions of this beautiful city. One of Cortez's soldiers spoke of a city built in the water that was, quote, like the enchantments they tell us of in legend, causing some to wonder whether they were dreaming. But not long after, we read, everything was destroyed, nothing left standing. The city was built on a man-made island, and since the water of the lake was salty, the Aztecs built aqueducts to bring in fresh water from afar. The city also contained massive temples, and on top of the main temple, humans were sacrificed daily, amounting to thousands of deaths each year. And their ritual was gruesome beyond comparison. Priests would cut out the still beating hearts of their victims, which they then offered to the gods. The bodies of the victims were then pushed down the stairs, and down at the bottom their heads were displayed on poles, and their meat was distributed and then eaten. The city also contained many modern facilities. There were schools, which taught writing, astronomy and history. There was a police force. There were garbage collectors and street sweepers. Restaurants with dishes from all over Mesoamerica. Botanical gardens. A zoo, an opera house, and even a museum with artifacts from even older cultures. And there was beautiful art, the most famous piece being the Sunstone, which we will analyze in detail. In short, there was nothing like this city in the world. Hey, good to see you. This is Stephan, author of In Search of the Sublime. On this World History channel, we'll trace humanity's relentless pursuit of scientific truth, moral excellence and enlightenment. You'll meet anyone from Mesopotamian astronomers and Indian yogis to Greek philosophers and Enlightenment scientists. And you'll meet them firsthand using primary sources, giving you valuable insights that transcend the surface level understanding you get on other channels. So go check it out for yourself. Let's start. Let's start with some backstory. According to their own descriptions, the history of the Aztecs started around 1200 AD, so in the European High Middle Ages, when a people known as the Mexica migrated into what is now called the Valley of Mexico. According to their own account, they came from a perhaps mythical place they called Aztlan, and from this word the Europeans derived the term Aztecs, which was not how they called themselves. A century later, they settled around Lake Texcoco, where they began to search for a sign indicating where to build their capital. The sign came, we read, in 1325, when an eagle landed on a cactus on a tiny swampy island in the lake, and that eagle was holding a snake in its mouth, which to this day is depicted on the Mexican flag. And this was their signal to build their capital in the middle of the lake. Using a special technique called chinampa, they then drained parts of the lake and turned it into usable land for their city. It worked something like this. They placed rows of poles in the water forming a square wall, which they then filled up with mud to create land. And this was then repeated over and over. The resulting city, named Tenochtitlan, became the largest city in pre-Columbian America, with at its peak a population of about 200,000 people. And here we see a beautiful map of the city made by one of Cortez's men in 1524. As you can imagine, when the Spaniards arrived, they could hardly believe their eyes. One soldier wrote, "When we saw so many cities and villages built in the water, we were amazed and said that it was like the enchantments they tell us of in the legend. And some of the soldiers even asked whether the things they saw were not a dream." But not long after, the Spaniards destroyed the city and renamed it Mexico City. They tore down the main structures and then used the materials to construct a cathedral and also palaces for the conquistadors. Afterward, the same soldier wrote, "No land like it would ever be discovered in the whole world. But today, all that I then saw is overthrown and destroyed. Nothing is left standing." Let's now describe this marvelous city. The city was incredibly sophisticated for its time. Since the water of the lake was salty, the Aztecs built aqueducts to bring in fresh water from a spring that was 4 kilometers away. Quite a phenomenal achievement. And once these aqueducts reached the city, they fanned out to the different neighborhoods of the city, and in the city, this drinking water was then bottled in jars and sold to the population. The Aztecs also built magnificent architecture in their capital. Their main temple in the center of the city was named Templo Mayor by the Spaniards. On top of this temple, daily human sacrifices took place, amounting to thousands of victims each year. We are told the victims were bent over a stone on their backs, while priests used stone knives to cut out their beating hearts, which the priest then offered to the sun god, Huitzilopochtli. The heart was then placed in a bowl held by a statue of the god, while the rest of the body was pushed down the stairs. And there at the bottom, the heads of the sacrificial victims were displayed on poles in rows in front of the temple. And according to Cortez himself, there were so many of these heads that they were impossible to count. And finally, the meat was then distributed among the various participants. The point of these sacrifices was to appease the gods, in order to prevent them from unleashing their wrath. To give you an insight into their view of the cosmos, I'll read to you a description by a Spanish friar, describing their fear of the gods during an eclipse. We read, "There was tumult and disorder. All were disquieted, unnerved, frightened. And then there was weeping. There was shouting everywhere. People of light complexion were slain as sacrifices. Captives were killed. All offered their blood. They drew straws through the lobes of their ears, which had been pierced. And in all the temples there was the singing of fitting chants. There was an uproar. There were war cries. And it was thus said, 'If the eclipse of the sun is complete, it will be dark forever. The demons of darkness will come down, and they will eat men.'" And although it is a crime against humanity how the Europeans destroyed the Aztec culture, it is also quite understandable that they were horrified by these sacrificial practices and then sought to eliminate them. Associated with the Templo Mayor was the most famous remaining artwork of the Aztecs, namely the calendar stone or the Sunstone. And let's now describe this beautiful piece in some detail. The figure in the center is believed to be the sun god, Tonatiuh, and we see that this god has a flint knife as his tongue. The 4 glyphs around the sun god are 4 of the so-called 5 stages of creation that the Aztecs believed in. And these 4 stages are called 4 jaguar, 4 wind, 4 rain, and 4 water. At the start of each period, we read that the gods chose a new sun god, that was destroyed when this period ended. And today we read, we are in the 5th era, with the sun god Tonatiuh as the 5th sun. The outline of the center of the Sunstone, including these 4 dots, spell out the glyph for motion, and this is the name of the 5th era. And here on the right we also see that same glyph, for motion. The name of the 5th and current era. Now let's look at the band surrounding it. Here we find the 20-day name glyphs of the Aztec calendar. For reasons not completely understood, they chopped up their calendar in periods of 20 days. And around this band we also see spikes, which likely represent the rays of the sun. On the outer band of the Sunstone, we see a double-headed snake that wraps around the stone, with their faces meeting at the bottom. And from their mouths emerge 2 deities, the sun god and the fire god. And on the body of the snake, we see fire symbols, which identify it as Xiuhcoatl, or the fire serpent. Now we move to the side of the Sunstone, and here we see rows of stars, and underneath it symbols of the planet Venus, and also more flint knives. And both of these symbols were associated with war. Today the Sunstone is displayed vertically, but likely it was originally placed horizontally. It is hypothesized that the stone might even have been a gladiatorial ring on which sacrificial victims would fight to the death. And notice here the same symbolism is used on the stone. This might also have been the function of the related Stone of Tizoc, and this stone has a hole in the middle, possibly used to place the heart of the victim, and it also has a channel to carry off the blood. And it also has fighting scenes carved on the side. And also notice that the same symbolism of the Sunstone is also used on stone vessels that were also believed to be for holding human hearts. And on top of this one, we see carvings that represent human hearts in the Aztec convention. To the left and right of the Templo Mayor stood 2 other temples dedicated to warriors. One was dedicated to the eagle warriors and the other to the jaguar warriors, the 2 main type of warriors of the Aztec army. The role of these warriors was to subdue other peoples to obtain captives for human sacrifice. In fact, the Aztecs terrorized their surrounding cultures in this way. At their peak, the Aztecs managed to subjugate about 450 different states, which they would regularly ask for tribute and sacrificial victims. And it was for this reason that Cortés got a lot of help from these cultures, who also wanted the Aztecs defeated. Now let's turn to the many facilities of the city. For instance, boys were expected to attend public schools. For commoners, there was the Tel Poshkali, which focused primarily on military training, but it also taught some practical skills such as agriculture and building techniques. For the nobility, there was the more prestigious Kalmikak, which was designed to train future military leaders and also high priests. It offered a more comprehensive education, which also included reading, writing, astronomy, history, calendar studies, and various other topics. The city also employed gardeners, street sweepers, and also garbage collectors, who ensured that the city was remarkably clean, especially compared to the European cities at the time. And there also was an active police force that patrolled the city. The king also had a botanical garden with plants from all over Mesoamerica. And there even was a zoo with mammals, reptiles and exotic birds. And also an aquarium with both freshwater and saltwater ponds. The Aztecs also greatly appreciated art. Statues could be found throughout the city, and there were even a number of museums of ancient cultures, filled with artifacts from Teotihuacan, Tula, and even the ancient Olmec civilization. Special attention was also paid to music. Aztec poets, we read, were remembered for generations. And there was also the Cuicacali, or the House of Song, which was a combination of an opera house and a music school. Take for instance this poem by Nezahualcoyotl from the 15th century, who was a scholar, a warrior, an architect, a poet, and also the ruler of Texcoco. We read, "With flowers you paint, O giver of life," referring to a divine being. "With songs you give color. With songs you shade those who will live on the earth. But later you will destroy eagles and tigers. We live only in your painting here on the earth. With black ink you will blot out all that was friendship, brotherhood, nobility. You give shading to those who will live on the earth. We live only in your book of paintings here on earth." And here is a depressing poem written when he was in exile. "In vain I was born. In vain I left the house of God and came to earth. I am so wretched. I wish I'd never been born. Truly that I'd never come to earth. That's what I say. But what is there to do? Do I have to live among the people? What then? Princes, tell me. Do I have to stand on earth? What is my destiny? My heart suffers. I am unfortunate. You are hardly a friend here on earth, life-giver." And finally, let's describe their incredible markets. Besides tribute, another source of wealth for the Aztecs was commerce. When Cortés toured the city's main market, he estimated that 60,000 people were trading there. There were entire streets dedicated to a single product, such as pottery, clothing, jewelry, and slaves. And there were also restaurants serving dishes from all over Mesoamerica. These markets were controlled by Posteca, or traveling merchants, who would also serve as judges of the market. And these same men were also employed by the king for diplomatic missions, and they also acted as spies to assess new lands for conquest. Having a large degree of independence, they often became even wealthier than the nobles. And as they were not allowed to show this wealth in public, they often returned home at night and wore rags to disguise themselves. And that is the marvelous story of Tenochtitlan. I hope you were inspired, and if you want to know more about the Aztec civilization or many other topics from world history, then read my book In Search of the Sublime. You can read it completely for free on worldhistorybook.com, or you can buy a physical copy on Amazon. Thank you so much for watching. Bye bye.